Welcome to We in Lewes, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the remarkable, creative, and energetic people who live in Lewes and are helping our community forge a collective soul as appealing as it is unique. These are their stories and their words. They are the we in Lewes. I'm your host, Kevin McGinnis. We're thrilled our guest today, as we begin the third season of our podcast, is Chris Rausch, the publisher and owner of the local newspaper here in the Lewes area. In truth, the Gazette is so much more than that. It's widely viewed as the reliable source of information about our area. How many times a day do you hear someone say, "Well, I read in the Gazette that"? True, you won't find news in the paper about the latest fighting in Syria or a cabinet confirmation vote in the U.S. Senate, unless the nominee is from Lewes. But as so many of our listeners can attest, the Gazette is the best way to find out what's happening in our area. The sponsor of today's episode is the Leanne Wilkinson Group of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, PenFed Realty. Leanne and her team have ranked number one in real estate sales in coastal Delaware for over 20 years and are now the number one real estate agency in this network in all of the United States, besting firms throughout the country, including in cities like New York, Chicago, and L.A. It is a monumental accomplishment. They make buying, selling, or just searching for the perfect home to start a family or ensure a grandchild visit easy. As I can personally attest, they're simply terrific. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
People know the Cape Gazette is published twice a week, but it's actually a lot more than just that. How many publications are you printing?
We do quite a few, twice a week standard with the Cape Gazette. Every Tuesday and Friday we publish the flagship. In the summer, we run another publication. For years, it was called the Beach Paper, more geared towards the tourist, lighter news, entertainment, things to do, that sort of nature. 2 years ago, we switched that over. We now call that the Current. Same style, a little more socially focused. The editor of that particular publication likes to call it a social paper zine. She came up with that term. I had never heard it before. And then each month we do special publications, whether they're weddings or home and gardens or dine-out guides, Christmas guide. We do one of those about once a month. And so when you couple all that with the websites that we publish, it's a full-blown publishing house for sure.
With your subscriptions and newsstand sales, the special publications, and a digital edition, how big is your reach?
I think the website is probably the greatest identifier, while the print product is still our flagship insofar as what we do. We really reach the full potential of a regional type publication, which is unusual for a community newspaper to have the reach that we do. So when we look at our traffic reports, the past 12 months, we saw slightly over 4.2 million users had logged on to the website, and over 19 million pages of content were viewed. So most community publications wouldn't have numbers anywhere near that. And then geographically speaking, it really comes from the entire mid-Atlantic region. So about 50% of the traffic, right here where you would expect Lewes and Rehoboth into the western side of Sussex County. But then the rest of that traffic, 2 million users plus, are coming from Washington, D.C., straight up through Baltimore, Philadelphia, New Jersey, into New York, and obviously northern Delaware. So there's just such an interest in what's happening in this little place, because that's all we cover, right? We're not covering D.C., like you said. We're not covering these other areas, but there's so much interest in what's happening in Lewes and what's happening in Rehoboth, whether people are second homeowners or they have business interests here or they vacation here regularly or they're planning on moving here. We just see all that traffic engage with the Cape Gazette and the community through that website.
You don't do gotcha journalism.
There's no long-term benefit to us to do gotcha journalism. We do, obviously there's things get printed that people don't like one way or the other. So I try not to do this, but you go on Facebook and read the comments sometimes. And somebody, this place must be desperate for clicks because they didn't like something. And, I think one thing people don't, it takes a whole lot of clicks to make any money. There's no value in an extra 100 clicks. There's no real financial value in an extra 5,000 clicks. That is not how we're going to sustain as a community newspaper. It's going to be on the value of the information we provide, the fairness that we show the community and the members of the community, and having people support us continually based on that.
Is part of the attraction of the Gazette the fact that it doesn't seem to be designed to make you angry? I mean, a lot of news broadcasts, and even in print, they seem to be sort of geared towards getting you upset.
Well, I think that does go back to the clickbait type instance. If you're a national or an international and you can drive 1 million clicks by getting people pissed off, then yeah, there is some financial gain there. But when you size that down to a community newspaper, again, 1,000 page views is not of any value. 1,000 page views that you put out there with a clickbait headline just to get people worked up and angry does not build a loyal readership. So, our goal was always long term. Our goal was to always build community connections, not trying to be polarizing. There's certainly things that are going to come up. There are certainly things we have to cover that are going to be unpleasant, that are going to be unfortunate, and we will cover them because it is our responsibility to do so. But I think it's equally our responsibility to cover the things that will drive community connection, drive empathy, get people to understand and actually know their neighbors and the people who are representing them, and not just be here to get everybody worked up.
There seems to be a balance that you guys are trying to constantly strive for, which is being on top of a news story, but also being accurate and truthful. And a lot of us who've been involved with papers in other regions, there's sort of a, ready, fire, aim sort of methodology. You always seem to take more time. I don't know if that's in part because of you're not daily, but you seem to take a lot more time to make sure you're right.
Yeah, that's 100% the idea. We've had a long time motto, long before I took over as publisher: when in doubt, leave it out. If we're not 100% sure what we're about to publish is correct and right and accurate and fair, I'd rather wait. I'd rather get scooped. I'd rather somebody put it out ahead of us than us put it out wrong, or us put it out without somebody having a chance to comment that should get a chance to comment. So we'll be last, but more times than not, we're going to be right and accurate.
I think that's a motto you would rarely see in a newsroom today.
It is. Especially with the movement towards social media and people saying they get their news from social media. I 100% there's an idea of I have to be first. Right or wrong doesn't necessarily matter to some of those people because they are chasing the clicks. They just want to be first online with it, first to Facebook, first to X.
I remember I was working on a campaign, this is years ago, and we were told that the number one source of news information for people between 18 and 30 was The Daily Show. And it's a comedy show.
Fortunately, that does not surprise me. We put out our own readers survey. We do one directly for this market with the Cape Gazette, and then we do one for the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Press Association. And why we don't have The Daily Show listed, we do ask a very specific question of where do you get your news? And a surprising amount of people list social media as their number one place they go to get their news. They're not going to a news source. They're waiting to see what Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or whoever is running that particular organization decides to feed them on that particular day. And we've seen huge waves of change when it comes to social media. When Facebook first came out and we reluctantly said, okay, we've got to market ourselves. We've got to be on Facebook. We've got to show our stories here. It was by far the number one driver of traffic to our website. Engagement on the actual page itself, the Facebook page, was through the roof. I mean, even the most modest of stories would get hundreds of likes and multiple comments, with others getting thousands of likes and hundreds of comments. Today, stories will go completely through the timeline with zero interaction. Now, some things still do catch on, but the referral traffic from Facebook is 30% of what it was 6-7 years ago. I mean, they come out and said it, that they're devaluing news in the feed, which has always been confusing to me. The response is, well, we're giving the people what we know they want because we're studying them and stealing their data and manufacturing, their timelines essentially. But it's always curious to me, before they made all these changes, before they developed this algorithm, all those same people, the 70-some thousand people that chose to follow us on Facebook, seem to be just joyous interactingly with us the whole time. And now all of a sudden you're saying, well, they didn't want to see your stuff anyway, so we're not going to show them to you. Hard to reconcile.
Recently, the Gazette ran an editorial about the resignation of 2 local elected officials. Both cited serious problems with their colleagues as the reason behind their decision to step down, but provided no examples or explanation of what they were implying. The editorial suggested that voters, in this case, deserve a right to know what's going on. Can you walk us through the decision-making process behind this editorial?
Yeah, this was a highly unusual situation where we had 2 elected officials in, I think, a 2-week span of each other decide that they were going to just step back out of their roles, and both left with these very vague statements that sort of cast the shadow of uncertainty on the elected boards that they were serving on. So one, I don't think that's very fair for them to leave the situation in that manner. If you have something to say it. That's why you were elected. You were elected to govern. You were elected to oversee. And if there's some systemic problem that you gained access to while you were involved with these organizations, isn't it your responsibility to speak up and say what the problem was and not just leave in the manner that you did? So we thought it important to editorialize that one. We don't feel like they helped us serve our mission of informing the community, and we don't think that type of action helps move the civic engagement along or help move those organizations along.
Did that one cause some reaction?
That one did. The editorials always surprise me. There are some that I think would really grab people's attention and get people talking, and they don't. They just slide right through, and nobody seems to care, which is fine. That one did catch the attention, and I've had multiple conversations about it, and it's nice to get that feedback, because when you're dealing with something that's an editorial, something that's an opinion by nature, you expect people to have different thoughts. The whole idea of those editorials are to get people talking, to ramp up that civic engagement and that conversation. And that one did the trick. That one I definitely got some feedback on.
A former mayor of Lewes liked to joke that if you want to know what people really think of the job you're doing, have breakfast at the local Arby's and bring your thick skin. I kind of get the impression, one of what you've just said and talking with you before, that you don't need to go to Arby's to hear feedback from those who are reading your paper.
No, in today's world where everybody has your cell phone number, everybody has your email address, and you're out in the community all the time, you're pretty easy to find. And, we have a community of people who have been very successful in their careers. They're very engaged, they're smart, and they are not afraid to tell you what they think. Which, hey, again, is okay. Again, you said you have to have thick skin if you're going to be involved in something like this.
The paper was founded by Dennis Forney and Trish Vernon, I think 32 years ago now, in 1993, after a long stint at a paper called The Whale. Does the Gazette still reflect, in some ways, their approach to journalism?
I believe we do. I was not there for the departure from The Whale and turning it into the Cape Gazette, but we still have a couple copies of The Whale hanging up for anybody who's been in our conference room, because it's certainly part of our story, how they lost touch with what The Whale wanted to be and decided they were going to start their own paper. The very first editorial was written by Trish, and it mentioned some of the things we've already talked about in having to be fair in community journalism. And there was a very specific line. I won't be able to quote it directly, but it was basically like, if you're going to say something, you need to be prepared that you're going to run into that person in the grocery store looking them in the eyes 2 days later. So whatever you decided to say, you better be able to back it up, and you better be willing to answer for it. And so I think in everything we've talked about so far, that sort of reflects our approach of being fair and accurate and being willing to engage on the things that we say. And Dennis had a line that I probably heard twice a week for 20-some years about what we do, and his line was, serve your natural market. So the Cape Gazette has a very defined coverage area, very defined market. We talked about its vibrancy. We've talked about its interest from, up and down the Mid-Atlantic coast. And, we definitely got some calls specifically coming out of the pandemic when some more local news agencies had folded or gone away. And it was, well, why aren't you out in Georgetown covering our council? And why aren't you out in Milford? And it's not that those towns don't deserve coverage. It's not that those councils don't deserve coverage. But we know this natural market that we serve works for us as a newspaper, as a business model. And so we're sticking to what we know.
Did Dennis have a set of sayings that he loved to work into almost every conversation? I know one that I've heard multiple times was, time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana.
Yes, Dennis had quite a few sayings, and I, after working for him for 20-some years, I very humorously find them coming out of my own mouth more often than I would expect. I'm lacking popping them out right now. They really seem to come up at the proper moment. He was very into the Tao, and he gave multiple people in the office his signed copies of the Tao, and believing that things would work its way out one way or another, and let the world do what it was going to do. And he would pull quotes out of the Tao all the time. He seemed to have one prepared for any given moment.
As any Lewes native will happily tell you, this area has changed dramatically in the last 3 decades. How has the Gazette evolved to keep pace with all the change in the demographic size and interests of our community?
That is definitely, I would say, a struggle for us. I mean, we've had to continually evolve our digital presence as we have scaled both print and digital to meet the growing demands of the market. It's been good for us in regards of readership and advertising. But essentially, we're serving the entire community. So you went from serving maybe 50, 60,000 people 10, 15 years ago. Now you're interacting with over 1 million people a year in readership and contact. We just had this conversation, Jen and Nick, our editors, that poor newsroom email box, the inbox just explodes. And, for years as a small community newspaper, almost everyone got a direct response, but it's literally not feasible anymore. If they get 100 emails a day with letter submissions and press release submissions and questions and coverage requests, to answer them all. So we literally were having the conversation the day before of like, you guys are your head's going to pop off. So, while we are still a community publication, we probably need to start treating some things like we're a little larger organization, and maybe putting a little notification up on that box. Your submission has been received. If we have any further questions, we'll reach out, but please don't expect an answer to every single little thing that's sent into us. It's sort of humorous too. We don't get a ton of foot traffic in the office there at the Cape Gazette. We're in Nassau Commons, and there's no real big retail or restaurant. There's a grocery store now, but we only see a couple people walk in through the office a day. But some of the calls and walk-ins we get of the questions, we'll have people call in and just say, I need to buy X. Do you know where I can get it? I can probably help you out. We go and try and find an advertiser and send them in the right direction. But the things that people will call the community newspaper for, I guess it's people who used to use 411. I don't know if that's still around or not, but yeah, we kind of act as the hub. Yeah.
You're an information desk.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Wow. How do you decide upon what columns to run with?
Well, a lot of our columnists are set, and you have a garden column and you have the food column and you have, Chris Flood and Ron MacArthur both have a standing column that they alternate. And we actually have a new reporter named Kevin. He's got about 30-some years experience. He's coming from Cortland, New York, and he had a column in his old paper. And I just said to him, I was like, I'm going to let you get situated, but I think it would be really cool because we have so many newcomers here. Your perspective of seeing this through the eyes of somebody, and he hasn't really spent much time down here, so he's really learning the area on the fly. But I think with many of our readers also being new to the area and learning how to navigate, the long-time locals versus the influx of newcomers, your perspective of what you see in this community as someone who's just basically walked through the door. So we're actually changing some columns up this year. So it's all really audience driven. If you get feedback, if you don't get feedback, if you look at the web numbers and see, hey, this column's really getting a lot of traction, we should keep running it, or we should pull this one back. Fred Mann's is always one of my favorite columns, and I still get it today. I own the Cape Gazette, and I'll bump into somebody and say, "What do you do?" I say, "Oh, I work at the Cape Gazette." And it's, "Oh, you know Fred Mann?" Yeah, I know Fred Mann. But I've also gotten some, in every, especially people my age in their 40s, almost everybody here has had Fred Mann as a coach or a teacher, or he's been around their sports programs. So like everybody does know Fred Mann. And then there's a few people very new. I'll get a call every once in a while and be like, I read your sports columnist column and I don't understand it. And I just have to say, if you don't get it, there's tons of other stuff to read. But I can assure you there's tons of people that get it and love it, and that's going to stay.
It's been observed that a newspaper runs on ink and advertising, and not necessarily in that order. Did starting out on the advertising side of the paper help you learn and appreciate the realities of the business?
I definitely think so. I believe I told you the story when we met before that I interviewed as a reporter and they declined. And I went over to WBOC, worked for a little while, and then came back and very incidentally ended up in the advertising department with little to no experience in sales or marketing or advertising or outside of my family's business in general. It was fortunate that it was sort of during the heyday of both local newspapers and when the real estate boom started down here. So it was somewhat easier. But as I, rode the wave through the first economic downturn starting in 2008 and then got to see the business through the pandemic, you really do grow a deep understanding and appreciation for the mechanics and how everything works. And I don't think I would have been equipped to run the newspaper today had I not ended up taking that track through my career.
Was there ever a tug internally with you about, well, I got to get over on the reporting side?
No, once I really got into sales, I fell into a groove with it. I enjoyed it. I spoke a second ago, just, I have some history growing up in a family that ran a small business, and it was just an interest to me. So it was a very natural fit, especially at that time, the early 2000s into 2010, where there were just every business down here was local. There wasn't, the major corporations weren't
right
in the area. We didn't have the box stores. So it was natural for me because I was actually interested in what people were doing, how they were doing their business. It was a natural conversation for me to walk through the door, not worried about selling an ad, and just actual curiosity. What are you doing? How are you making money? What are your pain points? Is there something that could happen, whether it's your marketing or your business structure, that can help, and just trying to be a resource to these people we were working with. So once I got started with sales, and the commission checks weren't bad either, I never really looked back.
When you look at your progress, your movement up the corporate ladder to the point where you are now the owner, it sort of all seems to make sense because you really got to have a chance to understand the business and keep the business alive. But there's not been many movies made about the owner of a newspaper as opposed to reporters at a newspaper. What do you actually do during a day?
It's funny, I sometimes think about this because I'll go into a day saying I really don't have a lot on my schedule. And then 5, 6 o'clock rolls around and I think, holy crap, I didn't get anything done that I thought I was going to get done. So, I mean, on a day-to-day basis, there's engagement with the ad reps, there's engagement with the production department, there's engagement with subscriptions, there's engagement with the newsroom. And I mean, I do have a lot of set meetings insofar as, we're going to meet with the sales team on Thursday. We're going to go through everything. We're going to get set up for the following week. I'm going to meet with the editorial board on Tuesday and go through. But the amount of stuff that just comes up on any given morning straight through the rest of the day is pretty impressive. And I thought I need to start, just take 1 week and write down just so I can go back and look. Because I feel like when I get asked this question, I sort of blank out. And I'm like, I know I worked all week. I know I put a ton of hours in, but I'm not necessarily sure what I did. Right now, it's definitely a lot of strategy. 2024 was a super weird year, I think, with the economy and the inflation and the election year. So we are looking, and I'm focusing my time right now on strategy. Where are we going to be? Where are we going to meet the audience? We're definitely going to, much to my chagrin, I don't like that we have to play the social media game, but we do have to play the social media game. We have to improve what we're doing there. We have to improve what we can do for our clients in collaboration on social media, because we have to follow where the audience is. And unfortunately, there is a certain portion and a certain demographic that is just where they live their lives, and we have to meet them there.
You purchased the paper in 2022, just as we were emerging from COVID. I'm assuming that was a pretty tough time to buy a business.
Well, especially a newspaper. And I can tell you I got some funny looks and comments from family and friends. I certainly don't think it's the path of least resistance, but it's something I felt good about and something I thought this community would continue to support. And so far I've been pleased to say that they have. The wild thing I think about the pandemic specifically, prior to that, I had a pretty good idea of what, the business flow would look like through different economies. But the pandemic threw all that into a crazy flux in that coming, we went into the pandemic and we immediately had to lay people off. We were one of the very early local businesses to get the PPP money in. We got it so early that we were told we had to spend it in 7 weeks. Now this rule changed, but it changed week 6. So we had laid a couple people off. We had done a rolling 4-day week to cut back on salary. Then we get this money and it says, well, you have to spend it to keep your employees and you have to spend it in 7 or 10 weeks. I don't remember the exact number. So we then put everybody back on full. We're trying to spend this money based on what we were told. And then in week 6, they're like, oh, no, you don't have to spend it off all right away. Again, we were really early. I'm like, well, you already spent that. And then we get the second round of PPP. And then some of the real estate market got crazy down here. The stories of people just buying sight unseen from homes in New York and D.C. So while we lost all of our restaurant advertising and entertainment and events, the real estate agents stayed in because they were still doing a fair amount of work in this weird economy. But as the PPP money came and then the individual stimulus checks came, obviously it cost us a lot in inflation on the back end. But coming out of the pandemic, we were in excellent shape. Businesses had money, so they were advertising. And then once that started drying up, we saw it changing. So I guess my point is I still don't really have the baseline of what I should expect normal to be, because we went from this super inflated economy coming out of the pandemic to this unsure, trying to kill inflation economy and businesses not knowing what's going to happen. And that's pretty much been the entirety of the time I've owned the newspapers. So I have to be real careful with the staff. And as I speak to people, just saying, we're going to figure it out. I just can't tell you, like, this is the new normal. I don't think anybody really knows what that new normal is yet.
You grew up in the northern part of the state, in Middleton, and it was on a farm. So, as many young people who've grown up on a farm, you, I'm assuming, worked a lot in your free time.
I did. I grew up on a farm, and my grandfather had actually dropped out of high school, and by the time I was born had started his own businesses. He had a gas station, a car garage, a home delivery business for fuel oil. And I'd say probably about the time I was 12 or so, I could run a lawnmower. I was pretty much up and working in my free time, and I would spend my summers with my grandfather. We'd be up at 5:30 or so and into the shop, and whatever I could do to help out, they would send me around. I'd run to the auto parts store, which was a Western Auto in one end of town and a Napa on the other end of town, and ride my bike or sprint back and forth for the mechanics and answer the phones and cut grass. And yeah, definitely laid the foundation for my work ethic of watching him work and going to work with him from a very young age.
And I am assuming that meant that there was just the presumption you would work. I mean,
yeah, I really didn't know any other way. That's just what everybody did. There wasn't anybody laying around and so you go do this.
No one was having deep thoughts on a couch.
No, there was not much philosophical thinking going on. It was very, very blue collar, and my grandfather was quite proud, and the business he built is still running today, and was I think a very beneficial way to grow up.
And then I think for high school you went to a Catholic school, correct?
I did. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten on, which has pretty much assured that I never want to put on a tie again, although I do it rarely when I have to. But
did you have were you taught by nuns at any point in that Catholic? Did you have to put your hand on top of the desk for the ruler slap?
I think we were just past the hump of corporal punishment when I got in there. I certainly got yelled at and got in trouble, but I think we had evolved to the point of no smacking the students with a ruler by the time I got in. But yeah, I would catch a bus in Middletown, starting in kindergarten, and 45 minutes up the highway to Our Lady of Fatima, which is now closed in Newcastle, and did that. We ended up moving about the Newark area when I was probably in 6th grade or so. So the drive shortened over time as my parents continually moved further upstate.
But for high school, you went to Salesianum?
I did, right in the city of Wilmington.
Now, if you're not from Delaware, you will eventually learn about this school. And I think that, there's in Hollywood, they talk about the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Here in Delaware, I think it's 3 degrees of Salesianum. Is that right?
That sounds pretty accurate. It's an amazing network, and I'm still in touch with a good, solid group of friends. And somebody had just texted a story of a friend who he's actually a silent partner in the Cape Gazette. He helps me out going in. He lives out in Los Angeles. And he's in the entertainment industry, and he got a call from someone, and they were on the phone, and he somehow got into background, and he said, well, I'm from Delaware, and this girl on the phone says, man, I only know one other person from Delaware, and their name is blah, 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 and he starts laughing because they were both Sally's guys, and both knew each other, and they were both in Los Angeles at the time. So yeah, my wife is always amazed at not only the Sally's connection, but just the closeness. If you grew up in the state of Delaware, you're going to be hard-pressed to go anywhere without bumping into somebody.
And you have to be very careful when you tell stories because so many people are connected. It's not a big state.
Yeah, if you're going to go rip somebody down, you should expect that it's going to probably get back to them at some point in time.
I'm sorry, that was you? I didn't know.
That guy you're just talking about was my cousin, so I'm probably going to have to go ahead and tell him you said that.
And you played athletics in high school, is that right?
I did. I played lacrosse, which has become a very interesting rivalry throughout the years here with Cape Henlope, and it was a good rivalry back then. So it stayed consistent, and it's sort of fun to watch that continue to play out.
And did lacrosse help shape where you went to college?
Oh, absolutely. I pretty much chose a college I knew I'd be able to play at and get out on the field, and maybe I was a little wiser in my younger years than I thought, because it was definitely the thing that kept me grounded and focused. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play. I enjoyed playing. I enjoyed my teammates in the game, and so that was sort of my reason to stay on track and keep my grades up and keep myself out of trouble. And it was beneficial. Still in touch with coaches and teammates today. We talk regularly, and it was a important part. I think everybody should be involved in team sports.
Do you think that's where you learned about training and the importance of training? It's playing college sports?
Yeah, I mean, to speak to those lessons about just team sports in general, of whether it's, training to keep yourself in physical shape or training to keep yourself in mental shape, or, understanding the need of how to push yourself and how to be a good teammate, whether you're the superstar or you're the role player. It was always fascinating to me. I was by no means the superstar, but definitely felt like I became a leader of the team, and learning leadership in that role is completely something that you have to deal with a lot of different personalities and egos, and to make it all work. And I think you end up dealing with that through life, especially as you rise up the ranks and you're dealing with more people. So glad for that experience, and glad for building those relationships and understanding the dynamics involved in team sports.
And then eventually you got a MBA in marketing at Wilmington University. Is that right?
That is correct. At some point after 2008, when things were down and slow and nobody knew what was going on, it had been my intention to go back to grad school after undergrad. And I ended up back down here at the beach and working, and was riding that out for a while. And I was pretty sure I wasn't going to go back into writing at that point. So I looked at two things. I had a good friend who was doing law school at night, and some other friends who had gone back and done MBA programs. So I was going back and forth whether or not to do law school or whether to do an MBA. And I randomly remember coming across an article at that time that it was the worst time to graduate with a law degree unless you were going to graduate, top of your class from Harvard. And I knew that wasn't going to happen, so I decided to go the MBA route.
But wasn't your real education, the practical side of the education, at a place called Sharkey's?
Yeah, that's definitely where I gained a lot of business experience. I mean, after leaving, my family business, I worked at a little place in Newark called Pizza Etc. That was like my 14 through 16-year-old job. Cheesesteaks, pizzas, short order cook, and then worked at the Sears retail department for many years. But when I started coming down the beach, I got a job at Sharkey's Grill, which is still there, different owners today. And by the second summer, they said, hey, we want you to kind of manage things, run the schedule. And I would bring all my high school buddies and my teammates down. I mean, hey, let's go live in Dewey for the summer. I'll get you a job. And it was easy because these are guys I knew. I knew they were reliable. They could go out and have a good time in Dewey, but I knew they were going to be there at 7 a.m. when it was time to go to work. So I started managing the schedule and the people, and ended up doing that for 6 or 7 years, and really ended up probably being the factor of why I am at the beach still. When I graduated, it was in undergrad, December in 2001, so right after 9/11, unfortunately. And again, the job market had really contracted, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was coaching lacrosse at Concord and working at a bar up in Newark. And the owners called me, and they said, hey, are you coming back down the beach this summer? And I said, well, I should probably take this degree and go get an actual job. And they said, well, we'll pay your rent if you come down one more year. And I said, well, I'll see you on Memorial Day. And so one more summer in Dewey, and by the end of that summer I landed the job at WBOC through a connection that I met at Sharkey's. Actually had gone to work there after putting himself through a journalism program at Kutztown. And so that was sort of my segue from the restaurant industry into an actual career.
But it's interesting that you fairly quickly moved into sort of a quasi-management position at Sharkey's.
Yeah. They were just getting started, and it was really when I went to work there initially, it was pretty much just the owners, and I was just taking orders and running things back. And then by the end of the summer, we were getting real busy, and it was just, hey, can you come help cook? So it just got to the point where, and I've always been like that, no matter what job. It probably speaks to how I got to where I am with the Cape Gazette. I don't like to not know how to do it. I want to know how to do. I want to be able to do every job in the business I'm working in. I want to understand how it works. There's just a natural curiosity there, and so everything from, all right, I'll help inventory the food. I'll help look at this because I'm curious and I want to know. So it didn't hurt that I came with 10 guys who could work the restaurant every single summer with me, so they didn't really have to worry about hire and fire, and I would just drag a bunch of guys down with me, and here's your staff for the summer, and we're all going to leave on Labor Day. But yeah, that was definitely a quick promotion.
So then you went to WBOC, and I would think, having gotten a degree in communications, this is a big step. I mean, this is sort of the sort of job you were hoping to get. Is that right?
Yeah, and I was initially very excited, and despite ending up in print journalism, most of my background in undergrad, and I'm going back to even Slasianum has a TV studio center, and so from back in high school, I was doing the homeroom show on air where you go on and read the announcements and you tell jokes and you do things like that. And so even in college, I was much more involved in the video and the editing and the being on camera end of things. So I had always figured I would end up on the TV end. But when I started at WBOC, they didn't have a reporter's position open. I was doing videography. I was editing, which I enjoyed. The hours were a little crazy. The pay wasn't so great at the time, and Dennis happened to reach out after we kept bumping into each other, and he said, "Are you happy there?" And I was actually already considering a change of going back to grad school, trying to find a grad assistant coaching job for a lacrosse team that would pay for grad school. And I told him that, and he said, "Well, if you come over here, I got a new project. I probably keep you busy for at least 2 years if you want to try something new." And so I jumped on that, figuring, it can't hurt. I'm not super happy with what I'm doing right now. And 23 years later, here we are.
Did you meet your wife, Alice, while you were at WBOC?
I did. In times we worked there, we crossed over by about 2 weeks. So I was in the Milton office. She was in the Salisbury office. So we really didn't see each other at work too much. But, WBOC is a great, especially training ground. They do a great job recruiting kids from the best schools, whether it's Northwestern or Syracuse. But so you also have a lot of 20-somethings going to work there. So we had a social group that would hang out. So even after I left WBOC, I would still hang out with this group a lot. And Alice and I kept crossing paths, and we were both seeing somebody else when we first met, and eventually in a year or two, as we kept crossing paths, we ended up hanging out a little more, and the rest is history.
Did you have any idea when you were starting to date that Alice would become the evening news anchor?
Yeah, she was the weekend anchor and doing some fill-in things at the time, and I knew that was her goal, was definitely to become the main anchor, and she had a very successful, good long run as the main anchor of WBOC. And unfortunately, when we had our second child, she was on the night shift, and it was just becoming a struggle. I mean, our first few years of marriage, it was like two ships passing in the night. I would be asleep when she got home. I would be gone by the time she woke up in the morning. So it was sort of like an extended period of dating, because we really wouldn't see each other until Saturday mornings most times. And then Sunday night, you go to bed and say, I'll see you next weekend. And so you were living in the same house, but with just completely opposite schedules. And it just got too difficult to manage by the time we had our second child. So she found a new career and continues to be very successful in what she does.
She's up at
Bay Health.
Bay Health,
Yeah.
right. And you have 2 girls, is that right?
We do. Let me get the ages correct here. 11, and then our little one will turn 10 on Christmas Eve.
Is either one interested in lacrosse?
They both play. They're both interested. My middle schooler is going to have the first time where she has to try out for a school team this spring. So we're trying to get her motivated. She ran cross country in the fall, which was impressive. I didn't know she was going to make it through or quit on me, but she ran it and enjoyed it. And yeah, they're both very active: swim, lacrosse, and dance. Tell us
about the Harry K Foundation.
So I've been involved with the Harry K Foundation since its inception. Harry Keswani, who owns Atlantic Jewelry down there on the boardwalk, I was his ad rep at the time, and he was certainly aware that, Alice was a TV personality, and he grabbed me and said, "Hey, I want you and Alice to come as my guest to the BB Ball that year, and I'm donating this piece of jewelry, and if Alice would sort of wear it around and showcase it during the event, then they're going to do an auction and auction it off." So we joined him, and at this event, he starts telling me, he goes, "Well, I'm going to start this foundation, and we're going to make sure that, school-age children in Sussex County have access to food, have access to food to take home, have access to food in the schools." And he's like, "I want to do a gala that's, bigger and grander than this one, and we're going to do it next year." And I walked out of there, and I told Alice, I said, "He's crazy. There's no way he's going to pull this together in 1 year's time. It's just, I've witnessed these things over the years. It's too much. It takes a lot of money, a lot of energy. You got to get a lot of people on board." And we were actually, so we pulled it off, and we were actually moving that weekend. We moved back from Millsboro, where we lived, to split the drive when Alice was on to Salisbury. We moved back to Lewes, and we're laying in all the boxes, and we had helped volunteer to do things to promote the ball and get it ready for it. But we never actually bought tickets because we knew we were moving that weekend. And it's Saturday morning at like 10 o'clock. And we're literally laying in the floor of this office room in these boxes all around us. And Harry calls and he says, what are you doing? I see you're not coming. You're not on the list. I've got seats for you. So we got up and we drove to the outlets and we bought clothes, and that was the first one. And so we actually just went to the gala the other night, and 12 years later, we're both still involved with the board, and just an excellent foundation. I mean, what started as what was supposed to be just feeding the kids of Sussex County grew so quickly into 51 pantries up and down the state of Delaware, backpacks in all of those schools that kids can take home on the weekends to make sure they're fed when they're not in school as well. It's just an inspiring story, and one nonprofit organization that has truly hits the mark on its mission.
Chris, is there one thing you wish more people knew or understood about the news business?
Well, there is something, and we are going to try and do a better job of telling that story. I don't think a lot of people realize how many people it takes to put that little old newspaper together every week, and to publish that website every week, and to put all these special guides together every week. I think I should have counted up before I came, but I think the masthead has 38 individuals on it right now. Everything from writing to photography to production to delivering to dealing with the subscriptions, and it is a tall task, and we have this excellent dedicated staff. And so what we have to get better at is explaining to people how they can support us, whether it's supporting the advertisers they see supporting us in the paper or buying a subscription. We have a lot of people who gladly, "I love your paper and I read online." I'm like, so you're reading for free, which we want you to read for free, and we appreciate that. But I think as the industry changes, we need to do a better job of explaining what having a community newspaper means. And there's studies on this. When areas lose their local newspaper, government waste goes up, tax spending, taxes go up, crimes go unsolved, less people run for office, voter turnout is lower. So we do believe we provide something for this community which is unique these days, and we want people to continue to understand and find ways to support us in doing what we do.
I know you spoke at a conference recently with other local newspapers, and you were sort of highlighted as the success story as opposed to what other people are going through. And I think that's something most people here may not appreciate, that you're considered in this industry or this subset of the industry a success story.
Yeah, when we go to these things and we tell people we continue to grow our print subscriptions, I mean, people will almost fall out of their chairs. That is so highly unusual. And it's market based. I mean, we do have a retirement market. I'm always pleasantly surprised too. I'm 45, so when we're around with the kids doing things and talking to people and meeting new parents, that how many of them are subscribing to the print edition of the Cape Gazette. And, that's why it's important to put the school stuff in, to put the sports stuff in, so people's kids are in there and they want to engage with the paper that way. But with the retirement community, I think the resort vibe plays into it a little bit as well, as I want to sit back and hold a piece of paper and set my phone down and read. So we're very fortunate, and it has bought us time that other newspapers haven't had, and I hope it's going to buy us a lot more time because the industry is definitely, as a whole in flux, and we continue to keep an eye on that, because we'd be silly not to make sure we're putting ourselves in the best situation for 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Some industry experts are suggesting that in 10 years, newspapers will exclusively be digital platforms with heavy reliance on audio and video clips, visualizations, and AI-generated copy. Do you believe that's the future for the Cape Gazette?
I think we have to continue to develop our resources in that direction. It's hard to believe that everyone will read print in perpetuity. It's hard to believe something as simple will USPS be around to deliver that in 10 years from now. I don't know. So we continue to focus, like I said earlier, on where's the audience going and what is the best situation for us to meet them there. So we are going to do a bit of a renewed digital focus as it comes to the website and social media this year. The whole AI thing, I don't even know where to begin. I know there's some newspapers that are already, setting a recorder in meetings and letting AI parse out a story. Now, there's certainly nobody's going to come up and whisper into the recorder's ear a news tip about something that's going on behind the scenes that's going to add, depth and context. I don't know if I would trust AI yet to correctly parse everything. I certainly know in my experience with playing around with AI, it still gets a whole lot wrong at this point. But it would be crazy to ignore it as a whole and not figure out how it's going to work its way into the news world in general. As we look at all this stuff, a Dennisism has popped into my mind. It's a Frank Lloyd Wright quote that he used. Weekly, if not daily, in the search for the answer lies the answer. So we continue to search for answers and hope that they crop up in due time.
Chris, thank you for joining us today and providing a glimpse into the Gazette and your approach to reporting and into your own life. It's a fascinating story. The Gazette really is one of the cornerstones of our community, and we can't thank you enough for your approach to the news business. And thanks for the article that you did on the podcast back in 23 when we were just starting. Getting a story in the Gazette is kind of a validation here in this community. Having said that, you're failing to include a picture of our beautifully decked out podcast golf cart in one of the hundreds of pictures you published at the recent Lewes Christmas parade. Well,
thank you for having me. It's much appreciated. You're now the second person to knock me for not including their picture. I got a call from the Cape May Lewes ferry and said, "Hey, can we get a copy of the picture you took of our ferry float?" And I went through our pictures and I said, "We don't have a picture of your ferry float." So a lot of lovely floats in that parade. It's hard to get to them all.
Steve and I were looking through it. Did you get a picture? I said, I screwed up. I didn't get a picture. I said, well, we'll see something in the Gazette. So we're looking through them, and there's one picture. Unless you're spending a lot of time on it, you would never know that black shape behind the Fort Miles group is us. Anyway, and thanks to today's sponsor, the Leanne Wilkinson Group. There's a reason they're number one, and it's the service they provide to their clients. It should be no surprise that they enjoy so much repeat business. And a special thanks to Leanne for being such a good sport during our holiday party recording. And thanks to you, our listeners, both loyal and new. It may be winter, and yes, the wind is as strong as ever, but Lewes is open, the community is thriving, and Steve and I still can't get a seat at the bar at Kindle. We're going to have a great slate of guests this year, so please stay tuned. Until next time, this has been We in Lewes, the podcast.